Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my great pleasure today to actually welcome a friend, but also a pioneer in academia in Israel, Professor Chaim Sukenik. Many of us know Professor Sukenik because for many, many years, he was in the United States. He made Aliyah in 95, joined the chemistry department at Bar Ilan University, where he served with distinction. In fact, I came across a fact that I didn't know, that in 2014, he was identified as one of the most influential olim of the preceding 25 years. We'll have to talk about that in a moment. And in 2013, he was appointed as the president of the Jerusalem College of Technology, an institution that some of us know as Machon Lev, but is much more than the Machon Lev I remember from when I was studying in Israel in the 70s. It's a very significant academic program for both men and women, Machon Lev, or the Jerusalem College of Technology's men division, and also the Machon Tal for women. So Professor Sukenik, thank you so much for making time and for joining me today.
It's really a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing what kinds of questions you're going to put on the table.
Great. Well, there's a whole bunch of them that I want to talk about. In fact, one of the fascinating things that we've talked about when we've gotten together is this project regarding artificial meat, if that's the right way of calling it, and its halachic status, and that the Jerusalem College is uniquely situated with the world of Torah and also the world of science. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, the background, as you said, it flows very naturally from the fact that Zev Lev, the founder of the institution back in the 60s, was on one hand an Israel Prize winning physicist, but also a tremendous Talmid Chacham, a man whose opinions in halacha were actually taken into account by the greatest decisors of the generation. So he was positioned in that way, and he envisioned a school which would embody that mix of Torah, Umada, and we hope that we are appropriate and worthy heirs to that tradition. The specific project that you're talking about relates to a Bet Midrash that we started, a advanced learning group about 3 years ago, where we have a group of about a dozen young men who learn issues at the cutting edge of modern technology. We bring in faculty members who are uniquely capable of teaching these guys the state of the art. In this case, it was a mix of cell biology, it was biomedical engineering, it was tissue engineering. So they spend some time doing that to make sure they got the facts right. And then they learn Torah, and they learn Torah with an eye towards trying to find appropriate analogies, appropriate precedent. And in this particular case, this is an issue that has now burst forth because on one hand, this is not science fiction. The idea that one can take a few cells from an animal and grow a steak is real. It's technology that's out there. When it was first started to be dealt with about 50 years ago, the dream of growing replacement organs was certainly one that was there and is done. Now, over the last 25 years or so, part of that focus has shifted to, can we find a way that will be more environmentally friendly, that will actually enable us to provide meat protein to a large fraction of the world. And there are in Israel about a half a dozen startup companies that are in that space. In the United States, there is an equal or greater number. It's a technology that's coming to market. And now the kashrus establishment, both the kashrus organizations, the individual rabbis, and I'm sure you're going to be getting this from your congregation before you know it, want to know, what is the kashrus status of meat that is grown in tissue culture conditions? Biologically, it can be made to be indistinguishable. It's not a veggie imitation, indistinguishable from real meat, taken from a slaughtered animal. And now what do you do? And the fascinating part to me is that not only is the range of technological possibilities great, there are lots of different ways of doing it, but also the range of halachic consequences is great. And just to put it in one sentence, there are some opinions that will take this meat and declare it to be parv. It's not considered fleishik, it's not meat, and can be mixed with anything. And there are some opinions that, depending on how you gathered those cells, they will actually say that the product that comes out in the end is forbidden even for non-Jews, because it would have the status of being meat taken from a live animal. So it's a wide open playing field. We're pleased that our guys chose to plug into that early on in the process. And they're now moving on to address everything from artificial intelligence and other technologies as well. So it's an exciting project.
It's fascinating. And at the end of the day, where do you think it's going to come out? Do you think it's going to be considered fleishik or prohibited?
I don't think it's going to be prohibited. I think that train has left the station, and the fact that there are significant opinions. There was just a position paper that came out from Sohar organization here in Israel that opted for a conclusion, and their conclusion was that it is parv. Even those poskim that won't buy the parv part do point to specific ways of collecting the cells and processing them that can make it kosher but meat. My gut feeling is it's going to probably end up in most scenarios and for most organizations being considered, you can do it kosher if you do it right, but it will be meat. I don't think that dream of the kosher cheeseburger is going to come by this route. I don't see that happening.
Well, but it'll be coming from an animal that was slaughtered most likely.
That's what some of the poskim would like, but that's what the industry is trying to stay away from, both from a public relations point of view. The minute you slaughter even one animal, that makes your company a little bit less friendly to the animal rights organizations, to many of the vegetarian and vegan organizations. So they don't want to give up on that. I don't know, it's hard to know how that's going to, but again, it's a matter of finding the right balance between the industrially preferred best practice and the halachic range of possibilities. What I love about the project is that we're not coming into it as B'nai Torah, as people who live a life of Torah. We're not coming into it after the problem is already out there and is not solvable. We're coming in at a point where we can actually try to influence what will be the industrial best practice. Whether we'll be successful in that or not remains to be seen.
And of course, in your tenure, you also brought on board Rav Yosef SV Ramon, one of the major halachic voices in up and coming voices and voices within Israel, to be part of the Beit Midrash, to be the Rosh Hashiva there.
Right. Rav Ramon is just a fascinating person. He's a wonderful person. I mean, his personality just radiates love and connection to Am Yisrael. He's an outstanding pedagogue. He has many, many projects that go beyond the scope of his activities at Machon Lev. But I think at the end of the day, he has been a large part of the driving force behind this Bet Midrash, and that mix of Rav Ramon's halachic expertise with the technological and scientific and engineering expertise that was already found in Machon Lev, where many of the faculty themselves are B'nai Torah who already worry about the halachic aspects. It was a perfect match. So that's a good direction to go.
So it's interesting for American audience who may not know the Jerusalem College. Is it analogous to a yeshiva university kind of environment where there's a half day of learning and a half day of general studies? Is it liberal arts? Is it only science?
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. In its inception, in the early days, Professor Lev actually wrote about his vision of training B'nai Torah to be the leadership of the state of Israel in technology, in the military, in government, in industry. What happened was they started with a vision of training engineers specifically, because that was the group that was identified as having that potential leadership capability. It was a men's only program back in the 60s. A lot of those young men came to Machon Lev before they went into the army, and many of them ended up making a career in the army. So in that regard, they were trained towards that direction. But the kind of time that you described, where one spent every day doing some amount of Limud Torah and some amount of your engineering, science, technology training, was absolutely the model. The model shifted a little bit when they opened up other majors, other career possibilities. It shifted a little bit more when they opened the women's division, Machon Tal, which opened about 25 years ago. There were certain subjects that were brought on board. The Limudei Kodesh, the religious studies at Machon Lev, basically there was an expectation of running a very yeshiva-like base medrash in the morning, till 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The campus is completely Limudei Kodesh, religious studies. The change happened partly, it happened for a variety of reasons. One of the more interesting ones, though, was that there did come a point about 15 years ago where there was a recognition that the religious environment on the Lev campus could be used effectively as a tool to enable those members of the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, who were interested in coming to college, to go to a college where they'd be comfortable in the overall college setting. So whether or not they were fully on board with a lot of the Zionist aspects of the Machon Lev vision really didn't make a lot of difference. What made the difference was you were providing a high quality education with access to really good jobs, and you were doing it in a setting that they were comfortable. They didn't feel challenged in any way religiously. However, what that did carry with it was that since a fraction of that community were coming from yeshivot, where they basically said, listen, I've spent the last 10 years sitting and doing only Torah learning. At this point in my life, I want to dedicate 3, 4, 5 years to training myself for a good career. And I'm really not interested in accommodating or in continuing my Torah learning in your Bet Midrash. I'll do my Torah learning my way, and that's okay. And at that point, the administration of the institution made the decision to allow that. So there is a mechanism where men who have a significant piece of Bet Midrash Torah experience can request an exemption from the requirement of religious studies. And that kind of proved itself, because whereas 15 years ago, there were 30 men from the Haredi community in Machon Lev, today there are 650. Now, we have 5,000 students, so it's a big student body. It's still a minority of the student body, but it really has proven to be an effective way of enabling people who want to be there to come and to be comfortable and to get good jobs afterwards.
And so you are reaching out to the Haredi community to bring them in. Is that part of the Zionist vision, part of the budgetary vision, part of the mission of the school?
It's a good question. I think it's part of a desire to serve Am Yisrael. 25 years ago or so, when the Ethiopian Aliyah was kind of peaking and had just brought a significant, I mean, it was never a huge number of people, but a significant number of people came in. There was a program established to teach engineering and technology to the Ethiopian community. And that was a challenge that nobody else took on, because they were regarded as very academically unsophisticated. And thank God that has resulted in hundreds of Ethiopian Israelis who now have degrees from Machon Lev in technology and health science activities. So that's been successful. But I think when you talk about the Zionist vision, you do ask yourself, what can I do that will serve Am Yisrael? What can I do that will be productive, both for me as an institution and allow me to thrive, but also allow me to occupy niche positions that will provide unique services. And I think that the women's programs today are doing that, and the Haredi programs today are doing that as well. And it's a useful thing.
And you mentioned before that Professor Lev, when he began the institution, wanted to create leadership for the state of Israel. Can you point to alumni who are among those leadership positions?
I think the highest profile examples of that, some of them are in industry. We have over 100 successful startups that have come out of our student body. Many of them, perhaps even most of them, were begun in Jerusalem. Some went international after that. So there is industrial leadership, there is technological leadership. I think that the original brand had a very big component of leadership in the IDF. There is a program that the Israeli army allows where, when a young man reaches draftable age, if he hits certain marks in terms of academic capabilities and leadership potential, there is a program called Atuda, where they will allow the person to do college before they go into the army, in return for the fact that they will do a somewhat longer army service. Atudaim, the guys who come in through that door, many of our guys ended up staying on in the army and making a career of the military. And I believe that what they succeeded in doing there was not only to reach leadership positions, but there was a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. It was just a huge opportunity for the religious soldier to not simply sit tightly, in his own little space, but to actually project himself and make a difference. There was a story a couple of years ago, which I'm not sure that I told you, the Arrow missile project, the Arrow 3, that generation is one of the primary components of the Israeli missile defense. It's one of the most challenging in terms of trying to take out intercontinental ballistic missiles. And there was a test in Alaska together with the American Air Force a few years ago. The fellow who was the technological head of that project and the head of the technology side of that delegation is a graduate of ours. And that graduate of ours, when there was a break between test fires, got up in the mess hall and said, okay, everybody, the Daf Yomi project, the project where people learn a page of Gemara every day, is now about to conclude one section, one Masechet, and I would like to make the siyum with all of you, and that was done over Armed Services Radio. Interestingly, though, he then turns to the Israeli head of the delegation and says to him, and I happen to know that today is the yahrzeit of your father, the day of his passing, and why don't you join me to say the Kaddish at the end? And that kind of unabashed pride in one's religious life and one's religious activity, I think is very much a part of the DNA of the institution. We are tremendously proud of it. And I think there were a lot of good examples starting in those early days, going all the way to today, where the Machon Lev graduate has asserted themselves. But please remember that as the institution broadened so that we have the women's division, you now have, we're training more women computer science students than any other institution in Israel.
So how many women are enrolled in Machon Tal, in the women's division?
It's about 50-50. So the hardcore student population that gets counted by the government bean counters for budgeting purposes is on the order of 4,000 students. There's another 1,000 or so in peripheral programs, and that's about 50% men, 50% women. There is both the Machon Tal program in Jerusalem. When it comes to the women's programs, we actually do make a provision to enable women from the Haredi community whose leadership really wants their women to stay in a somewhat more sheltered environment. We do make provisions for parallel tracks even within the Machon Tal campus. So there are, whereas on the men's campus, we don't do that. On the men's campus, the national religious guys and the Haredi guys are all learning in the same classes, doing homework together. And to me, that's part of the beauty of what's happening. On the women's side, there is an explicit provision. A woman from the Haredi community who wants to study in the Tal program, the national religious program, can do so. And there are those who opt to do that in some of the engineering disciplines, in the nursing school, in some of the master's degree programs. But there is also the possibility to attend a program that is exclusively for Haredi women, and that will determine their religious studies curriculum, and that will determine their local environment in terms of a social environment within the school. And that level of protectedness, if you will, is something that is regarded in a favorable way by members of that community.
Now, a person comes from the Haredi community and wants to go to college. There are some things they're missing. They haven't necessarily had the level of math that they'll need, whether it's for science, it's for business, the language, etc. How do they get ready to attend the Jerusalem College?
Yeah, so part of our responsibility, we don't guarantee that everyone will succeed, but we guarantee that everyone will have an opportunity. And we have a Mechina program, a pre-academic program, which allows students to come in. They do, because for many, especially among the men, many of them have zero academic credentials, and that they haven't done any secular studies since before their bar mitzvah. And now you have guys who are 22, 23, 24 years old, in many cases with families. So we do a 3-month pre-Mechina where they focus just on English and on math, just to see if they have what it takes in terms of dealing with subjects of that sort. And then if they pass muster, if they cut it there, there is a 1-year Mechina. And the Mechina brings them up to college entry level in math, in physics, in computer science. And it's a challenge. And there are very, very talented guys who make it. There are some very talented guys who probably because of economic and social pressure struggle to make it and some don't. So the success rate, the numbers who come into the Mechina and manage to get, say, through the first year of college. The standard Israeli college degree is a 3-year degree. The engineering degrees are 4-year degrees. It's on the order of 50%. We continue to learn how to make it better, what kind of support system they need, extra tutoring, mentoring. We're trying very hard to raise scholarship money to take off some of the economic pressure. But it's a challenge, and the people who jump in understand that they're coming into a very difficult and but they've made that decision. Nobody's pulling them, nobody's forcing them.
And you also have a program for Americans, and if an American wanted to come, whether it's after high school or later on, are there options?
Right. We do. What we realized is that it's an interesting statistic that I'm assuming you see in Chicago as well. The idea of coming to Israel for a gap year after high school, you have it with the kids from your high school, that's become very common. I mean, it's already been very common for a while. The demographic change that seems to be happening is that a larger fraction of them expressed an interest in staying on in Israel beyond the gap year. In some cases, that expressed itself by guys doing 2 years, let's say in a yeshiva, and then coming back to the States. But in some cases, they wanted to go to college. And we understood, as others have as well, that the level of Hebrew language skills that is typical even for the good yeshiva high school product is often not enough to really be able to do academic studies in Hebrew. So half a dozen years ago or so, we created an English language degree, or degree being taught in English. We have one in business administration and one in computer science. Those are both 3-year degrees by us. It's only 2 out of 20 different degree options. We're now starting a master's program in English, master's in nursing, because we found there is a population, mostly women, who made Aliyah. They developed they're working as nurses. They developed their Hebrew to a point where they function well in the clinical setting. But the prospect of going back and doing academic studies in Hebrew, taking exams, that kind of stuff, was just very daunting. So we're now starting to offer a master's in nursing in English. The idea being that we hope that these programs will enable both Israelis who still prefer to do things in English, recent Olim, children of Olim, but also if people from Chutz La'aretz, from the diaspora, not only English-speaking countries, by the way, because it turns out that European countries and South American countries, in general, their English is going to be better than their Hebrew. So offering them an English language degree option has proven to be attractive. We have over 20 different countries represented in this English language degree program. And thank God, it seems to be working well. It's attractive because the degree is already well established and very credible, both in the eyes of graduate programs and in the eyes of employers. And the tuition is standard Israeli university tuition, which is about 10% of American university tuition. So we're hoping that that will be enough to get those people to come and to stay. And I don't deny that I would be pleased if they then chose to make Aliyah, but they don't have to.
And a lot of universities around the world have started to work with a hybrid model, whether they offer degrees totally online, which is a great profit center for many of them, or if they create those opportunities where you can attend class, but you can also watch the classes if you have a job that gets in the way of attending. Has Machon Lev gone that route at all?
Well, COVID obviously pushed a large fraction of the world into developing those capabilities. The Council of Higher Education very closely regulates where we teach, what we teach. We have a lot of freedom within the academic curriculum, but for example, teaching off campus is something that they discourage. Teaching by Zoom, teaching remotely is something that we were thrown into, as was the rest of the world. What we have found, and what the Council of Higher Education has made clear, is that offering degrees purely by remote instruction is not on the table right now. And frankly, whereas initially I thought that was, oh gee, why aren't you letting us do that? I'm actually much more sensitive to the problems that come with purely remote education. You need the interaction, especially remember, if you're dealing with the population that needs a little bit more mentoring, a little more coaching, a little bit of hand holding, if you will, the computer screen just doesn't do it. So a mix of some in-person teaching and some remote teaching is happening. We found that the couple of years worth of mostly Zoom teaching has now created some gaps in people's education. Grades in subsequent courses in some cases are lower than we would have expected. Some people have developed some less than good habits about how they study and how they learn. So I think one has to be careful. There's a powerful tool there, but it has to be used properly. It has to be used with some discerning and some wisdom.
So looking forward at Machon Lev, what are the exciting things on the horizon, whether it's in the realm of the halachic investigation of technology or new programs or new opportunities?
I look, we now are launching, I would say, just about every year, we have one or two new degree programs. We just started a program in a subject called medical informatics. It's sort of at the interface between big data, data analysis, data mining, and medical records, medical information to develop the capacity so that you can both manage large healthcare systems and also manage and process complex medical and biological data. We modeled our program and it was done together with the University of Toronto. They've been outstanding in working with us. And we just got authorization to offer a master's degree of that sort. We have a bachelor's degree in a subject called bioinformatics, which is a little bit less of the management side, a little bit more of the pure science side. So those are both going along well. The programs on the engineering side, we are now in the process of trying to expand the options that we're able to offer there. We've started offering 2 different master's degrees, one in applied physics, and this data mining also is its own master's degree. And on the medical side, we are expanding our offerings partly in nursing programs and partly in things that we hope will allow us to then branch off into additional healthcare professionals. We're offering a nurse practitioner training now. That's a direction that we want to go. We feel that we offer a unique opportunity for those who want gender separation. We offer a unique opportunity to reach out into a population. I mean, remember, the Israeli ultra-Orthodox community, the Haredi community, is almost 1 million people. And there is an opportunity there, which if you're not going to bring them in pretty much under their social and cultural terms, you're just not going to make it happen. So rather than importing talent from India and from Croatia and places like that, I would much rather train those untapped pools of resources, of personnel that are already in Israel, but have not been given the opportunity to come on board into those places where Israel really needs their talents. So hopefully it'll be a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, but at the very same time, by the way, you aren't compromising on quality, nor even on an interesting piece of location. The new campus of Machon Tal is right next to, separated by a gate, I guess, from the campus of Machon Lev, which I also heard when it was first proposed, raised some eyebrows, but you kept on moving forward with it.
Yeah, and I think that we're dealing with an adult population, but we're dealing with a population that does want the campuses to be managed in a completely gender separated way. The same way that I don't think it would raise any eyebrows, and it is in fact true in some neighborhoods where there is a Beis Yaakov right across the street from a men's yeshiva. They each have their own thing to do, and I don't see that there's going to be a problem with it, but we are in fact duplicating all facilities. There will be no shared facilities between the 2 campuses. So libraries are duplicated, student service offices are all duplicated. So they will be run as 2 separate operations in a sense, but they're close enough that it will make the logistics simpler. And the government was really quite adamant that they wanted that logistical streamlining. So when they gave us a piece of land, they said, here's your opportunity for 13, 14 dunam of land, and here's where it is, and go for it. And I think that the exciting part is that it's happening right now. We're going up. We start digging right after Pesach.
Wow.
So
it is a very exciting time, and the things that you are doing at the Jerusalem College of Technology are fascinating. For the Chicago people, we know even there's a contest every year together with the Walder Science Center, where there is a scholarship given, a 4-year scholarship for students to be able to attend the Jerusalem College of Technology. That's one of the reasons we get to see Professor Sukenik in town, but also another one is that, thank God, his grandchildren also, or a set of them, live in Chicago as well. So we're able to make sure he comes and visits. Our time is really up. And so I just want to thank you for this opportunity. It's fascinating. I'm going to have to ask you on a different occasion of what happened to make you one of the most influential Olim of the 25 years. Well, maybe we'll do that in private.
Yeah, we can deal with that next time.
And
in any event, again, thank you for the opportunity.
And I wish you a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, and I look forward to seeing you in person.
Gam Lamar. Take good care. It's been a pleasure. Okay, be good. Okay.